Can start now. Yeah. Okay. Good morning and welcome to the 24th meeting of the Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Relations Committee in 2017. I'd like to remind members and the public to turn off mobile phones, and any members using electronic devices to access committee papers should ensure that they are turned to silent. Apologies have been received today from Jackson Carlo and Tavish Scott. Our first item of business today is a decision to take item 3 in private. Are members content?
Yes.
Our main theme of business today is an evidence session with representatives from the BBC and BBC Scotland on the BBC annual report and accounts for 2016-17. And I'd like to welcome our witness, Anne Bulford, Deputy Director General of the BBC, Donaldo McKinnon, Director of BBC Scotland, and Ken McQuarrie, Director, Nations and Regions. Welcome. Would any of our witnesses like to make an opening statement?
Please, Convener, I'd like to.
Thank you.
Shall
Please
I
go ahead.
Start
yes.
now. Thank you. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for the invitation to attend here today. I last spoke with the committee in September 2016, and of course a great deal has happened in the intervening period. The Director General was here in February to discuss the new BBC investment into Scotland, in network production and in the exciting prospect of a new television channel. With my colleagues here today, Ken and Donalda, we look forward today to speaking more about these developments. In July, the BBC published its annual report and accounts, together with disclosure of all individuals paid more than £150,000 in the year from the licence fee. The annual report for 2016-17 reflected a very strong performance by BBC Scotland across the year. Spend on network television production from Scotland went up by nearly 20 million year on year, and the number of network TV hours also saw a significant increase, over 200 hours on the previous year. Network radio hours were also up, and going forward these are figures we very much want to build on, as we seek to reinvent the BBC for a new generation of audiences across the UK, as much as for those in Scotland. It's not, however, an ambition without challenge. 2016-17 was the final year of the Delivering Quality First efficiency programme, under which the BBC had to achieve, in order to balance the books following the 2011 licence fee settlement, savings of some 700 million by the end of the last financial year. I'm pleased to be able to report to the committee that in July, when we published our annual report and accounts, we were able to show that we'd achieved annual savings of 720 million against that target of 700. We now have a licence fee settlement that is linked to the Consumer Price Index, and that's very helpful in terms of planning for the future. However, we will also very soon be required to absorb the cost of free licences for those over 75 years of age, and together with the need to meet inflationary costs, we will by 21-22 be required to save an additional £800 million a year. It's a big financial ask, particularly at a time when, rightly, BBC audiences are demanding more and more of the BBC. In Scotland, we recognise that more needs to be done to support the broadcast industry and to provide a more effective means by which Scotland and its people can be portrayed and represented on air. The investment in a proposed new television channel and the guaranteed additional investment in network TV content, allied to a recent announcement by the First Minister indicating that a further 10 million of government funding will be invested in TV and film and in Scotland, provides a strong financial base on which we can collectively grow the industry here and provide a significant improvement in the offer to Scottish audiences. I've heard many times from colleagues here in Scotland just how much there is a growing sense of what can be possible through genuine partnerships and collaboration and a collaborative approach towards a truly sustainable broadcast model here in Scotland, one that crosses all broadcast platforms and embraces all audiences. Recent government announcements on the intent to establish a dedicated screen unit within Creative Scotland to provide funding for the establishment of a hub of the National Film and Television School at the BBC headquarters at Pacific Quay in Glasgow give a clear indication of the determination and commitment to develop the industry and to provide much needed training and jobs in Scotland. Though the BBC has financial challenges ahead of it in the years to come, I also believe that we have before us a tremendous opportunity collectively to help to develop and build an industry sector and a broadcast offer that really does meet the needs and expectations of all audiences in Scotland and which showcases the best of Scottish talent across the UK. Thank you, Convener, for the opportunity to offer these opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Ms Bulford. Can I start by asking about the new channel, and then I'd like to go into more detail about the network spend in Scotland. Obviously, the committee, like many other people in Scotland, welcomed the new channel, but I understand it's not a done deal. You have to make your proposal to Ofcom, and there's a chance that Ofcom could, of course, reject your proposal. Could you perhaps, for the benefit of the viewers at home, explain that process?
Do you want me to?
Why don't I start, Convener, and then pass to Nalda if that's going to be helpful. The new channel is subject to a public interest test under our regulations. The first stage of that is for the BBC board to consider whether the public value of the new channel justifies any potential adverse impact in competition, which is a regulatory requirement. The board has undertaken that review and considered the question and has confirmed that the public value indeed justifies the new channel. The proposal now needs to be sent on to Ofcom, and it will be for Ofcom to then make a further assessment of the BBC's process, as well as reaching its own view on the balance between the public value proposal and any effect on competition. The process will take up to a maximum of 6 months to complete, and as part of our submission, we've made our argument strongly as to the public value of the new proposition.
So when are we likely to see the new channel on the air?
So we announced at the beginning of the year that the ambition was to launch the channel in the autumn of 2018, and approvals permitting, that plan is still in place. What we haven't done yet is absolutely identify a date. We don't want to commit to that date because, as Anne has just explained, the approvals process could take up to 6 months. But I am confident that if we do get approval, that we will be able to launch sometime in the autumn of 2018. And the autumn, as I have pointed out to a number of people in the past, can stretch as far as December 2018.
Okay. One of the criticisms that's been made of the proposal is the budget for it, 30 million. I think the First Minister in her speech to the television festival made this point. 30 million compares very poorly to the 75 million that the Scottish Broadcasting Commission said that would be required for a Scottish digital network, and is well behind, for example, the budget for RTE1. And I know that one of the former RTE executives is coming over to be your head of multi-platform commissioning. He's used to dealing with a budget of 142 million, but he'll have to, and you'll have to produce this channel for considerably less than that. How can this be done?
Delighted to say that Steve Carson has already, in fact, joined us at BBC Scotland, coming via BBC Northern Ireland, but yes, as you rightly say, from RTE. I'm actually very confident that with this 30 million, this is a starting point, that we can work very cleverly with others, as I've said previously, to extract maximum value, not just from working very cleverly with colleagues across the BBC, but also with other organisations, other institutions, by partnering, by being entrepreneurial, by looking even across the Atlantic, or indeed across to Europe, working with other broadcasters. I am confident that we can make this money work really well to deliver an exciting proposition for audiences in Scotland. I think we have an opportunity now that we haven't had in the past. We have the real estate, provided we get the approval, to do something really quite significant to address audience expectation in Scotland.
Right. Audience expectations are high. You've already committed to an hour of news, and you've already said that there will be original drama. I've been having a look at your tariffs, the BBC's tariffs for drama, and I was quite surprised to see that there's a different tariff expectation for drama, and indeed all content actually, between network and nations and regions. So, for example, drama for network can cost between 50k and 1000k per hour, whereas you've allocated between 30k and 450k per hour for drama in nations and regions, and that's reflected in entertainment and factual as well. Well, what's the tariff going to be for this new channel? How much are you going to spend on drama? Is it going to be the nations and regions tariff, or is it going to be the network tariff? Well, if it's the national channel for Scotland?
Well, as I've just said, what I'd rather look at is what we do in terms of exploiting what we have across the BBC in terms of resource. So that will take working very differently with network colleagues, and what I am absolutely confident of is that I have their full support. So there's that, and then there is, as I said as well, is working with other institutions, other public money, and indeed working with BBC Worldwide to extend that funding envelope. As you rightly say, these sums are challenging. Scripted comedy, drama are very expensive to produce. But I am confident through acquisition, through working with others, through experimental efforts on our part, endeavours, that we will be able to offer a wide range of content.
But if I could just press you on that, what tariff are you operating to? You operating in the new channel? Is it the nations and regions tariff, or is it a network tariff?
To be honest, we haven't identified what tariffs we'll be working on yet. Yeah. As I said, I want to look at how we work with others to increase the value to increase the value of the spend. Obviously, there will be other programmes for which across a range, factual, entertainment. We will obviously have some set tariffs, but again, we haven't gone into that kind of detail.
It's just because it's quite important. There's huge differences, and there are high expectations that this will be a national channel with high quality. So if it's just a fraction of what you spend on national production, that's going to inevitably leave people disappointed.
I understand what you're saying, but I think this is set against the backdrop that Anne has identified. I think we're very fortunate to have this new investment coming into Scotland. It's the biggest investment in Scotland in nearly 20 years. So I intend to make the most of that. And as I said, I am confident that we will be able to deliver something of real quality.
Right. Are you continuing to push for more money?
As always, yes, of course. And as Tony Hall explained, we have a funding settlement for the next 3 years, and this is a starting point.
Okay. I know that I want to move on to other members, but I also wanted to ask about the network spend, and Ms Bulford did talk about it has increased this year, but it's really quite variable. It was much lower last year. It was higher the year before. It's always much lower in terms of the amount of the licence fee money spent in Scotland that's raised here. It's always much lower than Northern Ireland and Wales. How do you account for the rise in the network spend this year and the amount of money spent of the licence fee in Scotland? Is there any particular reason why it's risen this year?
Thank you, Convener. The expenditure in 16-17 was in Scotland was 233 million across all services and platforms, which was an 11% increase on 15-16, and it's primarily driven by a very significant increase in network TV investment in original commissions coming from Scotland. That was an increase of some 20 million. The growth reflects increased drama content with new titles such as The Replacement and One of Us, transmitting alongside comedy, including Two Doors Down and the very, very successful Still Game. This attracted audiences of something like 1.7 million in Scotland and 3.8 million across the UK. As a consequence, the value of qualifying BBC network TV content from Scotland relative to all qualifying BBC spend exceeded the 2016 target of 8.6, reaching 10.3%.
You mentioned drama. I'm also convener of the cross-party group on culture in this Parliament, and we had a session on television drama earlier this year, and a number of producers that attended made the point that a lot of the drama that's been commissioned and that's been allocated to the network is being made by production companies out with Scotland, but it's been classified as a BBC Scotland drama. Quite often it is not representative of Scotland. It may be set here, like something like Rillington Place was made in Scotland, but I don't think by any stretch of the imagination one could consider it Scottish, and indeed most of the drama that's produced and that you say is a Scottish drama produced for the network really doesn't, in terms of the producers that we spoke to, isn't really drama emanating for Scotland that would tick the box in terms of representing the nation to the rest of the UK accurately.
Well, I think there are two separate questions in there. First of all, the qualifying definition, and the qualifying definition is laid down under regulation. It applies to everybody, and we meet that definition. And there is a mix of...
You meet the definition. A lot of people in the cultural sector look at that drama that you're producing for the network and saying it's Scottish, and they're saying, well, it's not. The production companies aren't based here. It's not written here. It's not directed by people that are based here. So, and quite often the content isn't even Scottish. You might have a Scottish backdrop. So how can you say it meets the definition?
I can say it meets the definition because the definition in terms of the location of the production company, the proportion of people who are working on the content, where those people are based, is a definition which is laid down by regulation. It's been in operation since 2000. It operates across all broadcasters in all parts of the UK, and that definition is subject to challenge. And if people have concerns about it, they can complain to Ofcom, and where Ofcom investigate it, and have investigated in the past, our definitions have been real and have been proved to be correct. The second point on portrayal is, of course, a great deal of drama goes out on television which is set in a place which is fictional. That's the nature of it. I think it's absolutely the case that there is a range of drama coming from Scotland, some of which absolutely fits into the portrayal of life in Scotland. Others of it is other drama coming from Scotland is made here, and even where there are, it is a more generic story using locations in cities and around the countryside here is something which resonates with audiences. Furthermore, when we look at the impact of television production here, and there are reports both from the cities of Glasgow and Edinburgh about the impact of that on the local economy, that's very real. It's showing an improvement, and we're very pleased to see that.
Well, certainly the Screen Sector Leadership Group, which was led by John McCormick, former head of BBC Scotland, and drew in from right across the screen sector in Scotland, was very critical about the type of drama that had been made and the definition of what constituted as a Scottish programme for network.
Well, I think we're very pleased to see increase of spend in Scotland on the scale that I've described, and we're very pleased to see the percentage of money raised in Scotland spent in Scotland increase. We expect to see that percentage increase as the investment in the new channel comes in, and furthermore the investment in network production in Scotland increases again. We have a guaranteed increase of 20 million through for the next couple of years, which will drive that percentage increase further. But against that backdrop, we have to remember that the vast majority of consumption of BBC services in Scotland is to BBC network programme designed for the nation as a whole. We're a UK broadcaster, and a lot of our money is spent on services which are provided to the whole of the nation, which are very much enjoyed by audiences here in Scotland. So whether that's the technology which supports iPlayer, the worldwide news gathering operation, or, for example, sports rights. Scottish audiences are benefiting from all of that. None of that is counting as Scottish spend.
I'll pass.
I understand what you're saying there, but to echo what Anna said, I mean, I think it is really important that 70% of the spend and 50% of the production staff, these quotas really do have to be met, and that is happening in Scotland. These are very important jobs for the industry. But also, it is absolutely our ambition to try and encourage Indigenous independent production companies, or indeed drama producers. And this year alone, we have just announced very recently the commission of 2 dramas to be produced this coming year. One, which is The Cry, which will be produced by a company called Synchronicity, which is a company based in Scotland. and the other, The Victim, by STV. So we are moving in that direction. What I think is important is that audiences are demanding quality drama on their screens, and I believe that that's what we're doing across the BBC. What's really important for me is that we're portraying Scotland in these dramas. So whether Shetland, Clique, One of Us, trust me, I think we're seeing Scotland on the screen in a way in this past year, and hopefully in the coming years, that we haven't seen for some time.
Okay, thank you. I'll pass you on to Liz McDonald.
Thank you very much. And looking at the performance statement, the audience's statement and so on from Ofcom, clearly that's a thing that you will be thinking about in planning ahead, is how to meet and how to understand and respond to the requirements that are in there. Can I ask about a couple of those this morning? First of all, around the issue of portraying the diversity of the United Kingdom and of its constituent nations and regions. I wonder what you understand that requirement to be in relation to where you are now, and what further changes you might envisage being required to continue to meet that in future. And perhaps if we could start with that diversity question, and I'd be very interested in your view.
Do you want to take that, or can I?
Just to continue, just to pick up on the convener's point, our drama strategy is certainly to have more drama that speaks of Scotland and to Scotland, and in that regard we're doing a lot of training and a lot of investing with things like the Writers' Room, where in May we had 200 young writers from Scotland attending that event. To Mr MacDonald's point, the diversity of the UK is absolutely firmly not only within the Charter but also in the Ofcom requirement, and we're absolutely welcome that challenge and welcome meeting that challenge, whether that's through drama or whether it's through programmes such as this Farming Life, for example, which I think we've had feedback gives a very accurate portrayal of what it is to run a modern business in rural Scotland today. We're really pleased with the response to that. The success of that programme, which has not only been welcomed by audiences in Scotland, but welcomed by audiences across the UK, means that we're likely to do more of these particular stories, which speak of a place, diverse characters, diverse situations, and where the particular, if you like, becomes the universal. And it's something that I'm particularly passionate about. I think it's at the heart of good storytelling.
I'm struck by that, and I agree there's been some very strong programme making reflecting parts of Scotland that perhaps haven't been well reflected on television before, including the programme you mentioned. I'm also interested in that point about networking some of these programmes, and I wonder how far that means that there will be more networking of programmes made across the nations and regions, in other nations and regions of the UK, because I think that would be a very welcome development if indeed this Farming Life has been welcomed outside Scotland. I think that's a good sign, and perhaps a sign that more of that should be done.
I think in terms of the relationships between Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, and we've talked of Steve Carson coming from BBC Northern Ireland, we have under the Nations and Regions a really close conversation where we're looking at absolutely what we're developing together, what we're doing individually, learning lessons from each other. And I think an example is, for example, the social, which we started in BBC Scotland, will now have a manifestation in BBC Wales. That will be, and possibly wider across the BBC. In terms of the transferring, there's an absolute welcome to take programmes from the nations to the network and show that to different parts of the country. Very strong channel relationships across all the channels, and a really rich conversation going on an absolutely regular basis between the channel commissioners and Donalda and all of our commissioning team. So that's absolutely where can we do more? Certainly, and we absolutely will.
Just in Scotland as well, it's really important that we do reflect the whole of Scotland back to audiences in Scotland. Kenny mentioned the importance of the social. I mean, that project in itself has featured more not just faces and voices from across Scotland, but content producers from across Scotland. And I think it's been a really important development. And also, they've also been commissioned by BBC Three to make a version of The Social for them, so they're very entrepreneurial as well. But I'd also like to mention the importance of radio. It's our portfolio of services and how we reflect the realities of Scottish life across all portfolios. I think what we do out of Aberdeen is really important, continues to be massively important to me, that we reflect the length and breadth of the country. But I think particularly that production centre, which has just been commissioned to make a series of programmes, or has made a series of programmes called Scotland from the Sky, building on the successes of Landward, but also what we do in radio and what we do on online, and what we do in news from the North East. So there's also a programme in Radio Scotland, Our Story, which again I think is a really, really important offering. So we need to build on the skills bases that we have, and indeed share these stories as widely as we possibly can, so that we are genuinely reflecting what is a very diverse nation.
Thank you very much. Can I ask about another aspect of the performance statement, which is in relation to spending on programming across the four nations, including England, and the requirement that there should be broadly similar expenditure on programming in the four nations going forward. I'd be very interested to know your understanding of what broadly means in that context, and how you intend to meet that and deliver that going forward.
In terms of the four nations, I think what we're looking at, where we want to move in terms of the creative endeavour to get the very best of content. I think one of the things we're trying to do is to learn from each other across the nations. I mean, a particularly good partnership with Northern Ireland Screen, for example, in Northern Ireland. So that's something I have a very close contact with the team in Northern Ireland, something that we're looking at, which will inform Donalda will be able to bring to the various discussions that we have with our partner, with all our partners in Scotland, to see what worked well there, so that where we can, if you like, not reinvent a particular wheel, but understand what worked and what didn't, and bringing that intelligence together across the four nations, and also from, I think within my current role, from the regions of England where there's been success, for example, in the northwest, where there's been a city partnership with Manchester and Salford. There are important, I think, lessons that we can learn. And I think it's about setting up, having absolute ambition to continually deliver more value, more representation, as far as the audience is concerned, but having the constructive conversations and looking forward to do that.
And I think we already are working very hard with our colleagues in the nations and regions. And just for example, another great example of Scotland exporting some of its ideas and its talent, the Comedy Unit, one of our prolific independent production companies in Scotland, has just been commissioned to make a version of Scot Squad for BBC Wales, and BBC Northern Ireland are also looking at that. So I think it's important just to mention that we export as much as we import ideas and templates.
Thank you very much.
Ross Graham.
Thank you, Convener. When we met in February, one of the issues that I raised was the Drama Commissioner for Scotland role. Now, you were in the application process at that point, so you were somewhat limited in what you were able to say about it. But just to very briefly follow that up before going to a point about radio, could you confirm that the Drama Commissioner for Scotland is in fact now a role based in Scotland for the majority of the working week?
Gaynor Holmes, who is the commissioning executive for drama, is absolutely based in Scotland.
Excellent, thank you very much. On the point about radio, Donalda, you just mentioned it. The network radio spend in Scotland has been declining year on year. The Radio Scotland spend has fluctuated somewhat, but it's down this year compared to last, and the number of broadcast hours is down, I think, about 6%. What is your ambition for radio in Scotland? Is this part of a gradual slow decline as we move towards other platforms, or are you still committed to radio production?
Absolutely, 100% committed to radio production, and I'm exceptionally proud of our network radio production teams, from radio drama to the work we do in features, to what we do in music, jazz, classical, what we do with our orchestra, Scottish Symphony Orchestra. I am conscious that there are fluctuations in spend and commitment, but I'm I am absolutely keeping an eye on that. And in fact, where there can be just some alteration as a result of the mix of commissioning, that can affect the numbers. But I'm pleased to say that I think these numbers are certainly going in the right direction as far as I'm concerned the last time I looked at them. I think it is really important to say, as I said, that we continue to produce quality network programmes from Scotland. And in the last few weeks, for example, we've had a series produced by our radio drama department, which was Flesh Market Close, which went out on Saturday afternoon on Radio 4. Building on that, Ian Rankin has just written another 5-part serial, which will go out again on Radio 4. As I said, I'm also hugely proud of what our radio features teams do, everything from the Enlightenment to the kind of science output that we continue to produce. Equally, as I said, music from here. I would like to see these numbers go up. I would like to see us do more for network radio, and I will be working with colleagues to try to ensure that that happens.
Thank you very much.
Richard Lockhead.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions just to pick up on some of the themes others have raised. Firstly, I'm a huge fan of the Proclaimers, and I bought their album This Is the Story in 1987, one of my favourite albums. It's great. And therefore I was very excited when the BBC made a documentary in Scotland celebrating the 30th anniversary. But I remember at the time it was only shown on BBC 2 Scotland, as opposed to being across all parts of the UK in the network. And slightly surprised by that, because they're quite a big band. I was just wondering how you take those decisions, why that, for instance, was designated for BBC 2 Scotland and only in Scotland, etc.
I mean, I think, as we've alluded before, a lot of these titles will find their way onto the network, possibly not at the exact same time, and I think it was probably important for us to have the first window in that transmission. The Proclaimers hugely important to us culturally, and we wanted to celebrate that anniversary, and I'm really glad that the programme, that it appealed to you. It was, I think, one of our highest quality productions of this year, and I'm very proud of it. But yeah, I think it's really important that we continue to have this dialogue with our network colleagues, and we do that on a regular basis. And I am absolutely confident that that programme will have a network reading at some point, as will the programme that we made about Billy Connolly, which went out around about the same time.
Yeah. I just do suspect that if it had been a 30th anniversary programme about the Beautiful South or some other band, that would have been across the whole of the network at the same time. So I was just trying to work out how all these decisions are taken, because I find it quite puzzling. Two other quick questions. Firstly, in terms of Scottish spend, I take the point in response to the convener's questions that there's regulations and anyone who wants to complain can go through Ofcom. That's quite convoluted. I'm just wondering what the BBC do to check that it's genuinely Scottish spend and it's not companies who are given the commissions who are based in Scotland but then commission other companies elsewhere to supply the personnel and the skills. What do you actually do to check that's the case?
Across the whole of the UK, we check against the criteria for the percentage, for the base of the production company, the percentage of people. We check line by line through the return and ensure that that's the case. It's a well-established process. It's been running for many years. It covers quotas in terms of outside of London quotas as well as national and region quotas. It's not a mechanic with lots and lots of room for manoeuvre in it. It's a regulatory process which we follow. I mean, it is the case that not only at this committee but over the years since those definitions were introduced, which I say was right back in 2002, from time to time there's been debate about should they be changed, should they be interpreted differently. I think when I last spoke to the committee, my view was that it was inappropriate and unhelpful for individual broadcasters to start flexing them. The rules are the rules, they're rules for everybody, that's where they are. But Ofcom have said that they're going to undertake a review of the definitions, have a consultation for that process, and we'll all have an opportunity to contribute to that. And if there are changes, of course, we'll apply them when they come through.
Okay, thank you. I'm sure that's something the committee can look at. My final question follows on from Lewis MacDonald, Deputy Convener's question about diversity within Scotland and the UK. And I read that you're going to employ 80 new news journalists in Scotland. So it's just to ask where they'll be based and how that decision will be taken. I think of my own constituency, Murray, for instance, and STV have a journalist based in my constituency. There's no BBC journalist. I just wondered how you're going to reflect rural issues and diversity within Scotland in terms of where they're located.
Well, I think there is the opportunity now to recruit from across Scotland. Clearly, our news headquarters will continue to be in Glasgow, but it's certainly an ambition of mine that we spread the number of journalists that we have across the country so that we have optimum news gathering potential to, as you say, cover rural issues from different parts of the country and indeed other issues. We've also invested with the Scottish Newspaper Society and in conjunction with our colleagues across the BBC in 20 new local journalists who will work within local newspapers. The recruitment for these will begin quite soon, so hopefully there will be a spread of these positions across the country, and we're already working with the Scottish Newspaper Society to achieve that. So that's over and above the 80 posts that we've announced. We will be recruiting next year.
Okay.
Okay. Can I just ask on that issue about costs? In the accounts, there's a figure of 36 million for distribution, which has not appeared in previous years. It appeared in 16-17, but didn't appear in previous years. Can you tell me what it is and why it hasn't appeared in previous years' accounts?
What it relates to is the proportion of costs dealing with transmission and with DTT, digital transmission around the regions and nations of the UK. That cost has always been there. In the interest of transparency, we've simply called it out and made it more transparent in the document in 16-17, which I hope is helpful.
Right, okay. Mary Goujon.
Yeah, I just had one question relating to the new channel, and it was just about the fact that it's going to be available throughout Scotland in SD rather than HD, and it was just to try and understand why that is.
These decisions are a balance. The decision that was taken and confirmed through the planning stage was that with limited resources, the priority was to invest in content rather than distribution. HD, there isn't an available HD slot for it. It's an expensive proposition to buy that up, and because you can't run it through the same transmission network as standard definition, you have to have a separate parallel one. It isn't always the case that people turn to HD even when it's there for them. And in any event, we're in a technology transition, and all material will be available via iPlayer on HD. Now, I understand in order to achieve it via iPlayer, you have to have access to good quality broadband, so we have to keep an eye on that, and that will come up over time. But it's a straightforward priority decision around cost, and our view was in these early stages of the channel we want to prioritise spend on content rather than distribution where there's a good alternative.
So is that something that can be looked at and changed further down the line as this develops?
Potentially it could be, but it would need to be looked at the build-up of availability of HD over iPlayer and access to that, which is a much cheaper way of providing that format out to audiences, much more efficient.
Okay, thank you. I also had a couple of questions relating to the gender pay gap, and I see from some of the information there, we see what the gender pay gap at the BBC currently is, and how do you intend to address that?
We published the gender pay gap report a few weeks ago. That showed a gender pay gap across the whole of the BBC of 9.3%. That compares to a national rate, as indicated by government, of around 18%. The gender pay gap report is, I hope, helpful in explaining what the gender pay gap is, which is average pay of all men to average pay of all women across the organisation. And it illustrates that the vast majority of that gap in the BBC is coming through a mix of staff at different levels. So broadly, whilst we are quite close in terms of mix of genders, 48-52 between women and men in the BBC, we have a higher proportion of men than women in higher paid jobs, either because of their seniority or because there's a concentration of men in parts of the organisation where salaries tend to be higher. For example, software engineering, where we have more men than women. So the way to address that, we've been working on it, speaking about it for some time, is to encourage more women to develop and come through into more senior roles, and to try to close those gaps in staff roles where we've got less women than ideally we would like. So it's an important aspect of our overall diversity programme. Indeed, in our gender pay report, we voluntarily disclosed our pay gap on BME, which is very low, negligible. But that isn't any cause for complacency, because with ethnicity, we also know we need to do more to bring on people into senior roles and improve the diversity of our senior leadership group.
Yes, I see another report here from Ofcom about diversity and equal opportunities in television, which highlight the fact that the BBC is the 4th out of 5 broadcasters on representation of women, and 3rd out of the 5 broadcasters on representation of senior women there. So you talk about trying to encourage more women to come through to these senior roles. I mean, what specifically are you doing to tackle that? What are other channels doing that isn't happening at the BBC?
The position at the BBC is the mix of leaders in our senior leadership mix is 42% women to 58, which is not cause for complacency. We would like it to be 50-50. We run a number of leadership development programmes to encourage women to come through. And when the Director General spoke in July and again in September, we talked about a number of additional things that we're going to do to try to improve that even further. One is to ensure that we don't have single-sex interview panels, which I think will be a good discipline to have across the whole organisation, building on best practice. And the other is to look again at our overall practice for attracting, recruiting and selecting the best talent and then moving them on through. Like many organisations, we still use traditional interview boards a lot. They don't suit everybody. There are other techniques that we can add into that. It's very high priority. We continue to do it. When we look at the most senior roles, the highest paid people, we see a lot of progress. Over the last 3 years, the promotions into that group have been 60% women or ethnically diverse.
Okay, thank you.
Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you and good morning. Am I right in saying that you're also running a separate review which is about undertaking into the BBC's approach to on-air presenters and editors and correspondents? Yes. Okay, so may I ask you, do you think the review will enable a more representative pool of talent to serve BBC audiences?
I think there are three things that we've been doing. The gender pay report I spoke about. Alongside that, we also published our equal pay audit for graded staff, and that concluded that we didn't have a systematic problem in terms of gender bias, although there's more that we can do to improve transparency. We decided that we needed to look at on-air talent differently and take a longer time over it, because the contractual arrangements and patterns of work are different, and the frameworks for deciding what people are paid and why and how are different. And we're running that work now, and that still continues. And that is really about who you've got and what you're paying them. The most senior talent list published in July is about a third of that list is women. We're not happy with that. We want that to be much closer to 50%. That's going to take a range of actions over time to refresh the talent lineups, to bring people on, to take opportunities in the schedule. The Director General, the board are all committed to trying to achieve that by 2020. We'll take every opportunity as it comes up, but it requires a whole series of different steps to be taken to balance that representation on air in the most senior roles.
And staying on the theme of skills training and recruitment, obviously the National Film and TV School is going to be delivered next April at Pacific Quay. I wondered how you're going to meet the aim to enhance equality and diversity in the screen sector, and how will you work to address the gaps in the existing skills provision? I'll let you answer those two, and then I've got two more short questions.
Do you want to speak about the school?
So yes, we were delighted to be able to announce that the National Film and Television School is to open in Scotland in hopefully January 2018, with a view to the first cohort of students enrolling from April next year. As part of the ambition, and just to address your question about diversity and inclusion are key priorities, and there's a joint aspiration that a third of all the places in the first 2 years will be fully funded scholarship places. The Scottish Government and the BBC are contributing to a bursary fund to meet scholarship costs and ensure students are drawn from a broad range of backgrounds. This is not only important just in the context of the National Film and Television School, it's also very important for us across the BBC. And in BBC Scotland, we have been running an apprenticeship scheme which is now into its 6th year. And we also have numerous traineeships. With the new recruitment in terms of news, we would absolutely want to ensure that we were extending the invitation to apply for these jobs to involve as much diversity and inclusion of all the groups that you identify as we possibly can.
Okay. And the other question that I'd asked was, do you think this is going to address the existing skills gap that you possibly have?
I think all of these initiatives and working cleverly with that, with not just the National Film and Television School, but other HE and FE institutions is going to be very important in terms of ensuring that we do have the right skills mix, and that is a priority for us.
Okay, so you've actually asked my last question, so I'll just ask you one more question. How do you encourage young talent to work in screen and television? You mentioned there a blend of learning approach. So, for example, the modern apprenticeships and the further education and the higher education. How do you encourage children from Scotland or school leavers to actually come into media and the screen sector?
I guess we're working with schools and colleges, as I said, on almost a weekly basis, a daily basis in some cases. Even some of the really important work that we do through our learning initiatives, I think hopefully exposes young children, even in the context of being part of programme making. We mentioned the social early on. I think we need to do more of that. We need to make the jobs in the BBC more attractive to those who perhaps hitherto would not have thought that they were suitable to apply. So that is a really important piece of work that we are engaging in currently with schools, colleges, universities.
Thank you. Jason Carlo.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Can I say, obviously, straight away, I'm still a huge fan of the BBC. I have a couple of questions from constituents. The first of them is they commend Gary Robertson and the whole GMS team, who are, I think, the flagship current affairs team in Scotland. And I have been asked how their salaries stand in comparison with the rather pampered personalities on the BBC Radio 4 Today programme, who have all rather publicly been engaging in a spat about how they're not paid enough. Justin Webb saying he's paid a fraction of what Nick Robinson's paid and everybody else. How are the BBC Scotland team, who managed to perform such a terrific service representing current affairs in Scotland, paid by comparison, and can I commend them in their discretion?
Well, I suppose, as you've identified, I think there are different markets. There's a local market and there's a network market, and there are different budgets and sizes of budget for network programmes as there are for local. So I guess it is within that context that we pay our on-air talent. But I absolutely agree with you. I think they do a fantastic job and we value them hugely. And I hope that they are remunerated fairly. And if they're not, my door is always open.
Well, that's good to know. £900,000 paid to Mr. Humphreys and Mr. Robinson, I'm sure, could be much better deployed. Since we last met you, those lovely swimming elephants have been consigned to the archives, and you have a whole new series of screen identities now, BBC Oneness. I'd quite like to know what that is, actually, BBC Oneness, because a number of people have asked me. But can you tell me how many of the new corporate identity links are Scottish-based? How are they determined in terms of the reflection of Scottish life, which is what I understand these identities to be, and what are they?
So there are a number. I would have to go back and have a look at exactly how many, but we can certainly get that information to you. As with all our idents, we change them from time to time. Sometimes they appeal to people, sometimes they don't. I think what was happened with the most recent BBC One ones, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, Anne, is that they've evolved over time and they've increased the amount of representation from around the country of the groups that are featured within the idents. And I think it was probably kind of enjoyed a soft launch to begin with, and I think that's ramped up a bit, and I think we do see more representation from across the UK.
It would be nice if it's possible to find out subsequently how it's determined what they are and what the Scottish ones are and what percentage of them represent the network coverage, because in its own subliminal way it does create a national impression of Scottish life, and I'd just be interested to know how it's been assessed, what they are and what they actually do. And I apologise, Convener, if this question came up earlier, and it is about the new channel. And I noticed there was a public consultation over a period of time. You will have had the conclusions of that. I note that these will form the basis of the representation that's made to Ofcom. I just want to know that there's been nothing in the public consultation that has caused you to substantially alter the intention or direction of the ambition for the new channel, and that as matters stand, because I think many people I've met are quite excited about the prospect of it, that it largely remains intact as you originally envisaged.
It largely does remain intact. Obviously, we have responded to some of the consultation, and that has been included in the public interest test as submitted to the Unity Board of the BBC just over a week ago. So that has gone through that process now, and it will go on to Ofcom in the middle of November.
And was there anything in the consultation that led you to adjust or alter anything in any significant or particular way?
I can't share that with you today because at the moment the document of the public interest test remains confidential until such time as we hand it on to Ofcom, and then it will be published.
Are you able to say, without saying the detail of what any change might have been, whether there is anything that is different in the representation that will go forward?
I do not believe that it is significant.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Did you have a supplementary to that, Ross Greer?
That's on a separate point, Convener.
Well, I'm going to have to get Mr Macmillan in first.
No,
Stuart Macmillan.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. Mr McKinnon, earlier on you spoke about the 20 local journalists with the newspapers. I was made aware of this by my local paper, the Greenock Telegraph. Can you provide a bit more information about this, please?
So this was part of an overall BBC local democracy initiative, where maybe Kenny could say a bit more about it. The BBC decided that in order to extend our ability to cover local politics, local government, that we would work in collaboration with local newspapers to not only appoint new journalists, which the BBC will fund, and these journalists will work with the local newspapers, but also to provide what we are calling a news hub, from which newspapers will be free to access content post-transmission. So it is very much an effort on the part of the BBC to enhance our local democracy provision, but also to work with local newspapers where they want to work with us to achieve that aim. I don't know if there's anything you wish to add, Kenny.
Yes, I mean, there is a particular focus on the reportage of, if you like, local government and local government institutions, which is at the base of this. I think there would be common agreement with the newspaper industry that we would like to, where we could support improving that, and that's overall the BBC has committed to shoulder the cost of these trainees who will be based in the newspapers, but the content would be available not only to the newspapers but to the BBC as well.
So its main focus is about local government.
The broad base, yes, would be is the initial thinking of that. But in different regions and different areas, they would have the discretion to apply that. But that's certainly the intention, is to improve the coverage in that regard.
That certainly sounds like a positive development. Because if I may say, this isn't just about yourselves, it's others as well, that there is a world in urban Scotland that's outside of Glasgow and Edinburgh. And there's a lot of excellent things take place outside of Glasgow and Edinburgh as well. But sometimes I represent Greenock and Inverclyde, and sometimes when you do watch BBC Scotland and also STV, there just seems to be a Glasgow and Edinburgh or a city's focus as compared to actually some of the good stories that take place in my area, potentially North Ayrshire, Western Bardenshire and elsewhere as well.
I couldn't agree more. I absolutely agree with that. I think there are fantastic stories that sometimes we don't get to. But what I do think we have now is an opportunity with the new investment, and indeed with the new news hour, to do just as you describe.
Okay. Thank you for that. I've got one other question. It's regarding the BBC Alba. Certainly, it has received less support in the BBC than any other channel. And when can we actually expect to see some improvement from the BBC in terms of the funding of BBC Alba?
Well, I think nobody will be surprised to hear that I am hugely committed to BBC Alba. I'm very proud of what BBC Alba has achieved, and I know Kenny is as well. In fact, I know Anne is as well. I guess, we do have to prioritise sometimes in terms of what we fund. I do think that what we've managed to achieve in partnership with MG Alba has been fantastic over the years. I'm not complacent about that. I do think that we do need to address the numbers of repeats, and we are working very hard with MG Alba. We've started a piece of work to look at the moment at the new investment, how we can make it work harder so that we can deliver more origination. We've absolutely committed to delivering weekend news. Since taking on the post of director, I've combined our two news teams, our Gaelic teams and our English language teams, and I think what we will get will be a strengthened offer as a result of the new investment, certainly, but also as a result of greater collaboration. I've also undertaken a major restructure of BBC Scotland, partly because of our new charter commitments to split commissioning from production. But I do think within that there are huge opportunities in terms of working in a multi-platform, multi-channel way to achieve a read across for BBC Alba that will be significant.
Certainly, it's there has been this consistent disparity in terms of funding for BBC Alba, certainly in comparison to Welsh TV. And that's a point that's been raised certainly in this committee and also in other committees before. And I think there is a head of steam building up in terms of when will this actually be addressed, and when will there actually be the parity of funding between the two.
Kenny, do you want to take that?
I think in terms of the what provision of Welsh language broadcasting, that the history is very different, from BBC Alba and the S4C and also Radio Cymru, in terms of the commitment. And you're absolutely right in drawing attention to the disparity, if you like, in the funding, and that is certainly historic. What we have tried to do is to approach BBC Alba, to approach in a different way, where, if you like, it's a channel which is for Gaelic speakers, but very inclusive of the whole of Scotland in the way that the programmes are, I think, welcoming to all of Scotland. I'm really, extraordinary. As Donalda says, I'm extraordinarily proud of what the channel has achieved and the impact it's made in Scotland, whether that be through programmes like Bannon, for example, which was made in Skye, or some of the commemoration of the First World War, where individual stories through Gaelic poetry, etc., have been both archived and made available online as well. So in all ways, that our total funding over Radio and the Gael and into television from the BBC and online is of the order of circa 15 million or thereabouts, in terms of the totality. It's a really tough licence fee settlement that we've had. The Deputy Director General outlined exactly where we are in the organisation. But what we are determined to do is to be absolutely innovative in supporting BBC Alba, and where we have any initiative that's pan-BBC, to ensure that BBC Alba can participate in that. The commemoration of the First World War was a very good example of that, where there was funding allocated to BBC Alba just as part of the overall provision. And where we're buying sports rights, we're going to be innovative in just looking at buying collective sports rights. But as Donalda says, on the commissioning split, Margaret Mary Murray and Steve Carson, the multi-genre commissioner, will work very closely together. There'll be transparency about the strategies, what they're trying to achieve. And I think we've built a good dialogue with MG Alapa, where we are absolutely clear as to what we want to deliver. Getting to parity, which is what you're asking about with S4C, in the next three years, the Director General said when he gave evidence previously, we've got a 3-year settlement, if you like, off the budget, and we're not going to get in that 3-year period to parity with the S4C, and I think that's largely because of the different histories and the different approaches, but also the different ambitions that we have in how we want to bring the channel to the people of Scotland.
Okay. Final question, Convener, just regarding the new channel and BBC Alba, do you see opportunities for BBC Alba to actually maybe increase content with this new channel and potentially have some increase in commissioning opportunities?
Absolutely, as Kenny said, that multi-platform commissioning team will work very closely together, and I think it's really important that not only do we work together, but that we learn from what BBC Alapa has done. And I certainly know that Margaret Mary and Steve are in regular conversation. It's really important that the big sister channel remains distinctive, that what is on offer there is not compromised, and we will make every effort to ensure that that doesn't happen. But equally, where we can showcase and where possible, we would want to share content that, if it goes out first on BBC Alpha, we might want to have a window of transmission where we can join forces in sport, in live events, in music. We should absolutely do that, notwithstanding that we should absolutely make every effort to ensure that the distinctiveness of each offering is there.
Thank you.
Ross Greer, did you still want to come back in?
Yes, if there's time, Convener.
Yeah.
Thanks. One of your answers on the new channel reminded me actually of a point going back to my question around radio. There was the temporary radio station in the lead up to St Andrew's Day, which was, from my understanding, very successful. Does the success of that indicate that there is the scope for a potential permanent Scottish station there, Scottish music station?
As I've said previously, and I will continue to emphasise the importance of radio to me in Scotland, and that ambition to deliver additional radio service, an additional radio service to Scotland absolutely remains on the table. The focus of our attention has to be on getting the linear channel off the ground next year, but I haven't lost sight of that, and it remains an ambition. And also, just as technology improves, as opportunity improves, when we get deeper into personalisation, I think the potential then to deliver bespoke services for people in radio, I think is much greater. And I even look at the way my 25-year-old is consuming radio at the moment. She consumes radio a lot on the move, and podcasting is something that we really need to understand better, I think, and probably get better at doing. And I'm considering a number of initiatives to ensure that that happens, and particularly in relation to the new services. What can we do in the read across of the new content that we create that could live on radio in a different form?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ken McQuarrie, in response to Stuart McMillan's question, talked about the lack of parity with the Welsh language channel, and you spoke about the historical reasons for that. I mean, if you look, like right across the comparison between Scotland, Ireland, and Northern Ireland rather, and Wales, even with the increased amount of licence fees spent in Scotland at 72%, we're still way behind Wales and Northern Ireland, who are almost reaching 100%. And I don't think we really, I know we touched on this at the beginning, but I don't really think we got satisfactory answers. And if I could just repeat that the Screen Sector Leadership Group, led by John McCormick, said that you should have a strategy in place over 5 years to tell us how you're going to get to 100%. Would you like to have another stab at that question and explain why Ireland and Wales are getting to almost 100% and Scotland's not?
So, first of all, as we said, we've put in place a number of measures. We've increased the network spend. We've delivered 10-point 3% of network in the year gone by. We have a 3-year budget where we'll absolutely maintain that and increase that over a period of time. Wales has a particular specialism in regard to the supply of continuing drama, particularly around Roath Loch, where the high-value productions tend to be the bulk of the difference in the spend between Scotland and Wales, and that is in place. We're really proud of what's coming out of BBC Wales with programmes like Sherlock and Doctor Who. They're high-cost productions. They contribute a tremendous amount not only to Wales but to audiences across the whole of the UK. In Scotland, what we want is to have the most sustainable but vibrant economy we can. We've increased the figures. We don't have a limit to our ambition, but nor are we setting we must get to that spend. What we want to do is to get the best possible content, but to make sure that we have on the ground a competitive environment in Scotland where we're delivering the very best programmes, and I'm confident that that will come through. Where we get to in terms of the spend, whether you get to in relation to the licence fee, I note John McCormick's comment on that, but at the moment we've got a 3-year plan, and we're working within that envelope. We've stressed, for example, the tightness of the financial envelope at the outset that we're working within under the current settlement. I think the Deputy Director General outlined that fully in the opening statement. That's the situation we're in. So we're ambitious to absolutely turn the amount of content into sustainable businesses in Scotland, delivering great stories that represent Scotland from across the UK. And clearly, if we get more drama on air, drama is the biggest driver of spend, much more than, say, factual or some of the other programming. That will begin to affect that. We want to see also how the channel strategy works out. We've invested heavily in the channel. Wales doesn't have a channel. Scotland does have a channel from 2018. And we're really ambitious and positive as to how that will change the environment in Scotland, and we want to give that a chance to succeed. So that's where. So note note this. We were represented on that group from BBC Scotland. Absolutely understand.
In the screen sector was represented, and that's not so. It's not just Mr. McCormick as a respected figure that he is. As you know, it was wide. It was the whole of the screen sector was represented in that.
Absolutely, and we've looked closely at the report and noted their commitment, their ask over 5 years. For the moment, we're in a 3-year journey as far as the BBC is concerned.
Right. I mean, on the representative thing, I've just been looking again at the public purpose, as outlined by Ofcom for the nations and regions, and it says that Scotland must be, or nations and regions must be, accurately represented, and the second of the nations and regions public purposes is obviously to support the creative industries in the nations and regions. So if I could just re-emphasise the points that we made earlier about drama, and even I think what Jackson Carlo was getting at in the idents is that it's the country has to be accurately represented on the network, and you have an obligation also to support the creative industries in the nations and regions. And I personally found it quite concerning that Miss Bulford didn't seem to think that there was a problem, which everyone in the screen sector has talked about here, in terms of the way that drama is produced and commissioned, and that it's not necessarily using production facilities from Scotland.
Well, we've spoken about the definitions and the confidence that we have in the way in which they're applied. But just to go back, when I last appeared here, when the Director General appeared, we've explained that we're very conscious of the need to do more in Scotland to improve engagement with Scottish audiences. And that's why we've done two things. We've set aside the significant investment in the new channel, and also we've made a very substantial commitment to sustain and grow investment from the network into Scotland. So there is a real opportunity there to not only increase the level of network spend, but to sustain it and to grow the sort of content that's going to appeal most to Scottish audiences in the way that you outline, Convener.
Right. Okay, thank you very much.
I think I could also say, Convener, there are examples of things that would not qualify in the spend, which will represent Scotland to a very large constituency. For example, the European Championships next year, based between Glasgow and Berlin. We're investing very heavily in that. We're already working with Europe to ensure that these championships are shown. Glasgow will be shown across a whole range of different European countries. So that wouldn't qualify, but it's certainly going to be investment. So not all of the investment is absolutely captured, but Scots, I'm sure, will enjoy enormously seeing one of their cities twinning with Berlin in these games. And so it's a fairly complex equation as far as that's concerned. Just to not all of it is caught by the definition, but there's clearly value to audiences in that sort of spend as well.
I'm sure it will be very enjoyable, but I'm just reflecting what the entire screen sector in Scotland is telling us. Yep. Okay, thank you very much. I think I'll call the meeting to a close. We'll now go into private session.